This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Today on CityCast Philly. In the Strawberry Mansion neighborhood stands a home at 2908 West Diamond Street. It once belonged to the family of a Pennsylvania native and one of the world's most renowned Black artists, Henry Ossawa Tanner. In 1976, the home was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but years of neglect have led to an uncertain future. I'm speaking with a historic preservationist who's helping to usher life back into the home about ways to preserve a historic landmark in Philly. It's Monday, May 13th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Christopher Rogers, co-coordinator of the Friends of the Tanner House. Welcome to CityCast Philly.
Yes, thanks for having me. Really excited for this conversation.
Christopher, you've dedicated years to researching and developing a plan with a team of community organizers to preserve Henry Ossawa Tanner's family home. What was it that drew you into this project?
Great question. I feel like I'm continuing to fall further into this project week by week. So the impetus for the organizing to save the Tanner House begins in about 2021, where there's a L&I sticker placed on the property, basically saying it's an unsafe structure and it could collapse at any moment. I only knew then about the historic blue marker that's dedicated to Henry Ossawa Tanner that sits outside the house. And Jackie Wiggins, Deborah Gary, and also Judith Robinson, three Black women who also have their own histories in historic preservation in Philadelphia, said we wanted to do something about this.
You know, who is Henry O. Tanner?
Henry Ossawa Tanner was born in Pittsburgh in 1859 to Bishop Benjamin Tucker Tanner and Sarah Elizabeth Miller Tanner. And his younger years, they would say like he was, his sickness and dealing with sort of like health. His father wanted him to work in the factories. Henry himself was like, I don't know. My body doesn't seem to be built for this type of work, Dad. But there's this amazing children's book that was made by Faith Ringgold that documents this very specific moment where Henry Ossawa Tanner is walking with his father in Fairmount Park. And he sees an artist, painting landscapes in the park. And he looks up to his father and he shares with him that, Dad, this is what I want to do. I want to become an artist. And I love that in Henry Ossawa Tanner's own words, he says, I wanted to become an artist. And I had no ordinary artist was what I had in mind, right? That he had this idea of like this unique story that he wanted to share that was based on the legacy of his inheritance from his family. So he eventually goes to PAFA, Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, studies under Thomas Eakins, definitely experienced some, racism while he was there, but at the same time was committed to the art. And then he leaves from Philadelphia, he spends some time in Atlanta, and he moves to Paris. And he begins to paint in Paris. That's where he begins to sell some of his first works. He eventually marries, has his first child. And once he does that, he just sort of commits his living his life in Paris. Though many of his works still travel across the U.S. today, the Banjo Lesson, the Thankful Poor. So his legacy is really strong. He was the first Black artist to be a part of the White House collection, which didn't happen until 1996, but it's still a feat,
Wow.
So that's just a little bit about Henry Ossawa Tanner.
Now, I have to admit, I wasn't as familiar with the Tanner story growing up. And not only just him, but also other members of his family who were really accomplished people.
Yes. The legacy of Henry Ossawa Tanner as a painter is just so massive and global. But it comes out of a tradition that his family sort of like held. So, in order to follow that tradition, you have to go back to his mother and father. His father, Bishop Benjamin Tucker Tanner, who was a bishop of the AME Church, and his father ran the Christian Recorder as well as the AME Review. These were two newspapers that were connected to the church that not only covered the history of like the growth of the church, but as well as covering the Black historical struggle. And particularly when you think about Henry Ossawa Tanner, who's born in 1859, his father is covering the sort of like period that takes us through the Civil War into Reconstruction, and says so much about what it means to build Black institutions that were about securing Black folks' freedom. And substantively, like what was the substantive institutions that needed to be built to maintain our freedom?
I also want to talk about some of the women in his family. His niece, Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, who was she?
So Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander was born and raised at 2908 West Diamond Street, and she went to high school in D.C. So she goes on to the University of Pennsylvania, where she becomes the first Black woman to graduate with her PhD in economics. Probably one of the first 5 Black women to have her PhD. But she doesn't stop there. You know, she tries to get a job after that. Folks say she's too overqualified for the roles. So she enrolls back into law school, and she becomes the first Black woman to graduate from University of Pennsylvania's law school, the first Black woman to get her JD, the first Black woman to pass the bar and become a licensed lawyer in the state of Pennsylvania. And at that time, too, she's going around looking for new roles again. And again, overqualified or not the right fit. And what happens is she's dating, she's in love with Raymond Pace Alexander, who's also a lawyer. And them two together, they start a law firm. And that law firm becomes one of the leading civil rights law firms in the city of Philadelphia between the 1920s and the 1950s.
Christopher, what a legacy this family holds. Does the Tanner family still own this home?
No. So the Tanner family moved out of the home in the 1930s and began to rent out the house. And there's rental records still available from that time in the archives that I'm excited to look through. Between the 1930s and 1950s, they're renting the home. And then in the 50s, they decide to sell the home to the Thornton, or Robert Thornton, who takes over the house in the 50s. 1976 is when it gets its National Historic Landmark status. This is the bicentennial, 200 years of the U.S. At that time, the Afro-American Bicentennial Corporation, which is led by the DeForest brothers, is working to ensure that Black heritage sites are going to be included within this sort of like national story. And one of the places that they work to list is the Henry Ossawa Tanner House, working directly with Robert Thornton to acknowledge the history.
After the break, what does it take to preserve a historic home in Philly?
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Okay, we just got through all of this rich history. Christopher, catch me back up to when you found the project back in 2021 and you saw the Department of Licenses and Inspection sticker that said the home on Diamond Street was unsafe. Can you tell me a little bit about what y'all decided to do after that?
When we, were able to work with Dr. Thornton to kind of get access into the house, we realized, yes, it is a very unsafe structure that could collapse. The roof was open, so every time it rained, all the sort of like water were dripping through floors of the house, rotting, accelerating the deterioration of the wood. So the immediate, most necessary thing was to figure out how to get this space watertight so that we could really assess it and think about what could be saved. So our organizing really began It was a very cold day in North Philadelphia, and we brought a filmmaker to kind of do like an opening GoFundMe crowdfunding video to say, people should recognize this history, and we want to do something to save this house. We started that project in February, Black History Month, to really uplift the call. And we ran that crowdfunding from February until June. Henry Ossawa Tanner's birthday is June 21st. And we raised about $25,000, which I thought was like a supreme feat. But in terms of the work that was needed, it was only maybe a quarter of what was needed to actually begin the work.
Christopher, you just told me about the Tanner family legacy, some of the early beginnings of this organizing. But why preserve the home if it was in such bad repair? Like, why not make a public statue, like civil rights activist Octavius V. Catto down near City Hall, or even Sixers basketball legend Allen Iverson, What is it about preserving this home, the Tanner family home, that's so important?
I love that. And certainly I come up with a new answer for this pretty much every week. But I think this week I'll say, one of the most important things about this property, and Ray Alexander Minter said this, Henry Ossawa Tanner's grandniece, it is not just bricks and mortar. It is a symbol of our African-American history. And what I love about it and what sort of separates it from sort of like statues and monuments is that it's 3D, it's space. We can come together. We can meet in the house. We can organize and gather and do projects from within the house. And it creates this opportunity to sort of bring neighbors together to recognize not only this history that was made right here in the neighborhood, but also the pursuits that they were after and the ways that people every day are continuing to engage in these pursuits.
What are the challenges of preserving a historic building or a home in Philly?
Great question. There's the technical aspects of it, right? Like the historic protections. And so that means if you have to fix up the house, you have to fix it according to its historical period of significance, which means in practice, you might have to spend more money and you need more resources to do it. And there's not a public fund that is dedicated to supporting historic heritage. So establishing a nonprofit, the Friends of the Tanner House, Inc., to be able to steward this house for the long term allows us to be able to tap into different resources and apply for grants. So like finding resources is one piece. I think another piece is planning. These are like 3, 4, 5, 10-year projects. And you have to be thinking about, okay, we need to do some assessments. We need to be able to bring in architects to understand what the revitalization could be. So like those technical pieces are a huge part. But I think the most core ingredient is understanding what the possibilities for this house could mean for the community. And I think once you understand its function, how a reuse of a house create a function that is needed and desired by its community, it gives a purpose to drive you through all that work. And it is work that we're still going through right now.
Okay, so what are some, first initial steps you would recommend if I'm interested in trying to start this process of saving a historic building in the city?
Great question. And we actually just recently held a convening for about 20 Black heritage projects around these same sorts of processes and insights and opportunities. One of the immediate things is understanding the sort of like story of the space and who is that story important to. I'm not one of those people who believes that all history needs to be this sort of like universal recognition for everybody, but you have to realize who it's important to, because those are going to be the first people that help you get the project to the next stage. So there are sort of what folks would say ways of designation, getting the houses designated, which come with a bit of protections. Like the house, couldn't be demolished. There's other things that cannot happen to the property. But I think what's most important is understanding the story, and what is the part of that story that you want to be able to share around that space and really letting that story drive you through the rest of the work. So figuring out what is the story of a site, of a space, narrating it, sharing it with folks, and really just allowing that to build a community. And then once you have that, then the question becomes, okay, what do we want to happen with this property? Can it be saved in the way that it is? Is there another way of honoring the history that is present here that may not include the house? These are all things you should worry about because you're going to have to raise a ton of resources and commit a ton of time to doing it. So all those things are included, but certainly anyone who's interested, two sort of specific places to start with. Go to the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia website, as well as the Center for Preservation of Civil Rights Sites. And while it says civil rights sites, they are focused on Black heritage in the sort of grand sphere. So go to these places, and there's a lot of resources around folks who have done this so that you can figure out ways of doing it too.
Christopher, what are the next steps and the goals for this home?
So what's next for us is we're finalizing a year-long grant-funded community visioning process, which was sponsored by the Mellon Foundation in partnership with the Center for Preservation of Civil Rights Sites. So we have a block party coming up on May 18th in partnership with the Strawberry Mansion CDC, 2829 Diamond Street. There's a pocket park right next to it. We'll have an amazing celebration celebrating all the efforts and organizing that we've been doing throughout the year. DJ Dr. Dre, not that Dr. Dre, Strawberry Mansion Dr. Dre.
Hey, oh.
On the ones and twos. Rod Jones III, who's done a lot of work with the Doc Thrash House Project, another important site of Black heritage, will be helping us with screen printing. So we have some giveaways for the Tanner House. And then the Daoud El Bakar Quartet jazz performance we'll have there as well. So music, we got a DJ, and then we're looking to get Down North Pizza, and another amazing emerging.
Down North. They have the square pizzas that are like deep dish.
Yep. So that's what we're expecting to cater with. It will be out from 11 to 3, and really just celebrating all the efforts, continuing to build community awareness, engagement, and letting folks know about what's to come. Like, we also have some stabilization work that will be getting started really soon at the house. You know, we got to work on a wall to make sure that we are, have a safe, stable structure. We don't want any L&I sort of investigations anymore. So we're working on it. And after that, we'll be in strategic planning, building out the Friends of the Tanner House board. We're making our first hire soon of a community engagement coordinator. So we're just on the beginnings of putting the building blocks together for a really long and enduring effort to sustain the Tanner House for what it means and what it could mean for the community.
All right, that was Christopher Rogers, co-coordinator of the Friends of the Tanner House. Christopher, thank you so much for enlightening me with all this history and much success on the ongoing work at the Tanner House.
Yes, thank you, CityCast Philly, and continue to follow us at SaveTheTannerHouse.org.
For more information about Friends of the Tanner House, check out the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about the past and possible future of the Henry Ossawa Tanner home, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.